All right, good morning and welcome to Hooked on Drupal. Today is Wednesday the 28th. I'm Shane Siegle, the Marketing Director here at Commercial Progression, and this is a little bit of a different setup for Hooked on Drupal than you might be used to. Usually it's Chris Keller and Brad Snurziak. I never pronounce his name right, but usually we're in the garage getting the developer's perspective of things. And I think a few times the owner and founder, Alex Fisher, has been walking around outside in the hallway fielding phone calls, but didn't venture all the way in on the podcast. So this is the maiden voyage of the founder of Commercial Progression. And we're also joined by a special guest today, Ann Siegle, is that correct? From Spoke8 over in Lansing.
Yep.
Is that correct?
That's
okay.
Correct.
So, and we happened onto this conversation recently about comparing and contrasting CMS options. And Ann had a very interesting take on that. But before we get into all of that, just a sneak peek of what the content is about today, comparing and contrasting WordPress, Joomla, Drupal, with an interesting automotive analogy. But before we go all the way into that, Ann, how about a little introduction about yourself and Spoke8?
Well, I'm the CEO of Spoke8 Marketing, and we are a digital marketing agency in Lansing, Michigan. And as part of the work we do, we have a small web development team, which we have augmented with help from the folks here at Commercial Progression. So they've been able to add services and really a suite of tools for our client projects that we haven't been able to deliver. And we sit very clearly in that marketing agency space. So they've been a great help. And that's what we do.
Very good. And Alex and I go back a little ways on the open source side of things. About maybe 5 years, I think.
Yeah, I think we're about 5-6 years now.
Right on. And we met originally in kind of a similar fashion. We had a conversation that was being maintained between friends about open source technology. So maybe you can take us back there and tell us a little bit about Commercial Progression.
Sure, yes. As you remember, we had the Michigan Drupal Meetup group. I started with a co-founder, probably about 5 years ago. And we did an event at Mango Languages in Farmington Hills, a really cool upstart at the time. They've grown immensely since then with, I think they're bootstrapped, doing a lot of cool things with language translation. But we did a Michigan Drupal meetup there, and Shane had come, I think it was your first time, and we had another guy, Todd, and it turns out at the end of the meeting that I ran the Drupal group, Shane ran the Joomla Detroit group, which was one of the largest in the country, and Todd ran the WordPress Detroit group. And so we happened to have the three founders of these different local meetup groups, and we decided to just have monthly breakfasts. So the three of us got together. I think we planned an hour, and it usually turned into 2 or 2.5, and we were all running our own, kind of one-man shops. And we're just kind of doing an honest comparison of what's working for you, what's not, what's good in the world of Drupal, Joomla, WordPress, and what's not. And it was really cool. I think we did those breakfasts for, maybe about a year?
Yeah, it was close to a year. And it was pretty insightful. Each of us had chosen our path and stuck to it. But you're always coming across clients that had a request, or they had already been vetted out for, we're going to do this in WordPress, And so having someone else as a resource to engage that conversation was really helpful, but you do get kind of stuck in your own world, and in a good way. We each picked something to become experts at, and so recently the humility I've had to take on is that the Joomla guy who started the local Joomla Detroit group, had to jump ship, and as I was growing in the types of projects I was interacting, I was saying, wow, this Drupal technology really has a lot of advantages, and Joomla is always trying to do what Drupal is already accomplishing. So, and I guess that's kind of why I keyed in on the conversation that we happened across last time you were at the office here, Ann. So, maybe just kind of teeing that up for you and giving you a chance to unfurl your analogy. I really loved where you went with your own experience as a developer even. But then this whole car world that you're a part of, and
we didn't know anything about.
I had no idea. Yeah, so we have this car aficionado who's doing like Baja races and has this whole world of car analogies to relate back to CMS selection, and I think that's really helpful. So maybe if you could unpack that for us.
Sure. So I will say that I started in the web development world, in the CMS world, with Joomla. And I was a huge proponent of Joomla, and we did actually have some Drupal projects that we did with another partner at the time. So I was familiar with Drupal, but Drupal always seemed just very complicated. And in the early days, it was simple in its complexity, and I think it still is today. But the best way that I could describe the differences between Joomla and Drupal is this car analogy. And I'm a little bit of a car geek, so I actually do a lot of work for a client of ours on social media under the handle Car Girl. So I've got that little that car side. So I liken Joomla and Drupal in particular, and WordPress kind of sits out there too. I've done some stuff in WordPress, but really when you think about the two big players of Joomla and Drupal, is these two big CMSs. The Joomla side is a lot like my Subaru. I have two Subarus at home, but it's a lot like my Subaru in that out of the box it's great. It does everything you want. You can take it off-roading, you can get through the snow, you can take it to the beach, you can go mountain biking, and you can bolt a ton of great stuff onto it. And everybody makes stuff for Subarus. That's their thing, right? You can add a Yakima rack, and you can put a roof box on, and you can put, any one of a number of things that you can do with your Subaru. And it's very sporty, so you can get out there and accomplish almost anything you want to accomplish. And that analogy works really well for Joomla. So if you have a client that says, you know what, I need to do X, Y, and Z, you can go out there and find all of those things. The problem comes when you want to do something that's never been done before. And that's really where you go and you grab your Subaru and you crank up the hood and you look in there and you go, well, shoot, I can't do anything with this. I can't make it go any faster. I can't tweak. To some extent, I can add a few add-ons, but I can't really tweak how much exhaust is coming out of the back. I can't tweak the horsepower. I can't do anything with it. It's essentially a lockdown system. And there are some things that you can do, but as a typical user, it's difficult and challenging to do those things in Joomla. So you close the hood, and you go out to the web, and you search on there, and you find something great, and you buy it, and you have to buy everything for Joomla, just like you do for your Subaru. And it's, even the little things on the back that have all the little badges that you buy for Subaru that tell all the wonderful things you love, like dogs and yoga and mountain biking. You have to buy those too and stick them on the back. So you got to buy everything for Joomla, and so you buy something, you bolt it on, you think, you know what, this just doesn't work for me.
And these are all third-party resources that you're just attaching to Joomla.
Yeah, you're just attaching them. It's not part. They don't. They're great components. We still use many of them all the time. So contrast that with Drupal, and really Drupal's a lot more like Formula One. And so the analogy with Formula One is that Formula One auto racing is one of the premier auto racing series in the world. It's open wheel, and it's not like stock car racing. It's a little bit different. It's different than NASCAR. So with Formula One, there are 3 engine manufacturers, and you get one of those engines. It comes literally in a crate. They deliver it in a big wooden box, and they deliver it to the teams. And they get an engine. Usually they get a couple. And then everything else, with the exception of that engine, I mean everything else, hoses, clamps, everything is built around that engine. And Drupal is a lot like that model. So you come in and you say, okay, we've got this great engine, and the engines are fairly comparable. Maybe one engine's purportedly slightly faster than the other, but you've got a good engine. And then you have a manufacturer that's attached to that can build all sorts of things. And Formula One teams are huge. They're massive teams. The guys coming over the wall, there's 12 to 16 guys that come over the wall to do the work on the car, but then there's all the folks in the back that are doing all the development on this car. Suspension, chassis, tire selection, and even when you think about it, the strategy of the race itself is really complex. So it requires a bigger team of people, but you can do anything. And the differences between the cars in many cases are quite significant. So we're measuring it in Formula One in hundredths of a second, but if you extrapolate that out to Drupal, you can say you can have a car that's way in the back that's built on the same engine as the car that's way in the front. what's the difference? And sometimes there's a minute difference between those. And in Formula One racing, a minute is like a chasm of time. Yep. So what's the difference between that car that's a minute ahead and the car that's in the back? Or the car that's 1/100th of a second ahead of the nearest competitor and still wins the race handily? And that really is the stuff that you can do with it. And that's where I think the Drupal analogy is the best analogy, because you can do anything with it.
Yeah, I'd probably add to that analogy a little bit. In Formula One, you have professionals that specialize in Formula One building those race cars. In the Drupal world, I think you get people that maybe aren't specialized in building those race cars or those websites. And I think you end up with something kind of like one of my first cars, an 86 Dodge Caravan on a second engine that's burning oil and burning coolant that you have to fill up every time you put gasoline in it. Mm-hmm. And I think we've encountered a lot of Drupal sites like that.
Right. Well, and we mentioned, or we didn't mention it in your analogy just now, but the MG came up.
Yeah. So the original analogy was that Drupal's a little bit like an MG, and of course
we've moved away from that.
Yeah. Because in all fairness, really Drupal is a high performance environment, and if you look at the kind of companies that are developing for Drupal and you look at the kind of projects they're able to develop in Drupal, it really is a high performance.
But you could handicap and build an MG.
Oh, there are some companies building MGs with Drupal, absolutely.
Right. And that's what I've always heard presented from Alex's perspective, is this team approach, which seems to me that really fits well with the pit crew and everybody who's coming together to make that car do what it could.
Yeah, if you just have the driver, you're not going to win a race with just a driver or just a good developer. I mean, you can have the best developer in the world, and he's not, he or she's not going to get you to the end of the race. And I think you were talking a little bit about strategy, or you started about that.
Yeah. So I think the idea of the strategy in racing is that there's a whole series of things that need to happen, and the the folks that from the team owner on down to the guys that jump over the wall to do one specific job all have a role to play. The drivers in and of themselves have talent, but their talent only goes as far as the car that's been built around them, and quite literally built around them, because without that strategy of knowing when to pit, when to fuel, what tires need to be on the car, at what point, and having that whole thing put together, that project management, that development team where everyone has a specific role that they do really well. Without having all of that, you're going to end up with the car that's a minute and a half behind in the back. And you're not going to end up with a synergistic team. The teams that work really well together, and you look at the pit crews, and in 10 seconds, or less, actually about 2.5 seconds, they can fuel the car, splash and go in most cases, where they just put a little bit of fuel in the car. They can add fuel to the car, they can change all 4 tires, and they can send the car back down the road, down the pit lane in like 2.5 seconds. Whereas the teams that struggle with that, the fuel hose gets stuck. They don't put enough fuel in. They send the car back out. Sometimes cars run out of fuel in the last stage of the game, and if your web development project runs out of fuel at the last stage of the game because your team has failed to execute the correct strategy, that's a big problem. That's executing without all the features you wanted. It's executing with features that don't work well. And so having that end-to-end and having that big team behind you, I think, is key for a successful open source development project.
Yeah, so maybe, again, to extend that analogy, I mean, if you look at a race as one lap around the track, like we're going to build it and then launch it, it's really not a great approach with websites a lot of the time. I mean, it is a process. It is a race. There's more than just one lap or one iteration around the track, so to speak. And I think that's something we try to approach with clients, and I think it resonates. But sometimes when it comes down to the end of the day, I mean, if the person signing those checks understands that or not, it really shows a difference in what's the end result of that website. You could have a great strategy, but if it's not implemented through until the end of the race, or you run out of gas, yeah, absolutely, it's a major issue.
Yeah, and some of what we're seeing here with the relationship between Spoke8 and commercial progression, like you mentioned, the strategy and and how are you going to win this race in the end, and I kind of see that as where you're coming from, that marketing perspective. Every lap is an iteration of like, is this working? And we're going to have to adjust and tweak things and go out and do it again and try to take ground, and they really do come together. And I don't know if I'm pushing the analogy too far, but the content and everything, the fuel that has to go in it, and all those little decisions that you make for each lap. yeah, it takes a lot of people. And maybe you could speak to that marketing side of the strategy a little bit.
So when we look at the marketing as car analogy, when we look at marketing, we say, how does this site function for the client's larger goal? And there's always a larger goal, whether that be we want to deliver a better service or a product to the customer, or we want to deliver a tool or a feature to the customer. There's that marketing goal that at the end of it. At the end of the day, customers don't really care what their website is built on. In many cases, they don't even know. They don't necessarily care how their website is built. They do care about the team that's involved, but mostly they care about that end deliverable. They care that the fact that it's delivering exactly what their business, right along and aligned with their business strategy. Mm-hmm. And if we look at that from a car standpoint, what we say is that the driver is responsible for just one aspect. And the team behind the driver is what's pushing the whole thing forward. But the driver says, I want to win. And that goal, and the team owner says, I want you to win. And so I'm going to put the best driver in the seat, but I'm also going to build this whole team around it. And that's what clients really look for. And I think, so if you can educate your client and say, this is the reason why you want this F1 platform versus the MG or the Dodge Caravan. This is the reason why you want this F1 platform. The client understands that I'm going to get to the finish line in the position that I want to be in, whatever that position is, whatever their business strategy is.
Sure. Yeah, and then you have both of those dovetailing together to create, the complete winning strategy, right? The best performing car and the best performing driving strategy. How are you going to pass everybody?
Yeah. And there's, and the interesting thing is if you're breaking this out to an analogy with a car, the driver gets a lot of information from the team as they're going. So they're getting a lot of insight into where we need to go and making those changes. I think we do that in our projects all the time. A brand new team starting out doesn't have the synergy put together yet.
Sure.
So working over time with commercial progression to develop that team approach and develop that synergy is something we're constantly evolving. Mm-hmm. A lot of great drivers go out and their team, for whatever reason, is not spot on with that project. They're not spot on with that race, and the driver ends up halfway through the race, blue smoke coming out the back of the car, God forbid, fire coming out of the back of the car.
That's like my Caravan.
Yeah, exactly.
Old 86.
Yeah. So that can happen even with the best engine in the world and the best teams in the world and the best driver in the world. You can still have a time where the strategy doesn't go as you intend. And so then you have to come back and say, well, how do we adjust that? And I think that's what is the hallmark of a great partnership, is the ability to come back and say, okay, what can we do to improve strategy? And that's going to happen with any project that you do and any relationship that you have. And that's the kind of relationship that we have with commercial progression, is that we're able to come back and say, okay, how can we improve on the process that we started last time? How can we go from midfield to pole in the next race? And how can we go from pole to winning the race? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and certainly the clients that we've worked with, I mean, they're a part of that team, that partnership too, actually having a client that understands, like you can't guess everything that's going to happen. It never goes as planned. That's the only thing you can count on, right? And so how do we react to things when they go wrong? How do we deal with the difficult issues? A great solid team with a client as part of that team, you can come out above that and really succeed. And that's what I've seen certainly with clients that we've worked with independently, but clients that we've worked with together. Mm-hmm. I know we've had things change and their priorities change, and
sometimes
laws change.
Sometimes within the really short, what seems like really short development period of time as well. We've even seen, objectives change.
Right. The analogy might break down a little bit just with how quickly the technology landscape evolves on you. Mm-hmm. It's like racing, and all of a sudden there's a windstorm. You're like, well, we're just going to keep going, and now we have new engines. So being able to adapt to that on the fly, and then also having the experience, right, after you've raced 100 times, you kind of know the types of things that you're going to encounter.
Yeah. But every race and every project is completely unique. Mm-hmm. You start out a race and you get into it, and a storm that they've been tracking on the radar moves in a little bit sooner, and you're caught out there. It's a 4-mile track, and you've got your dry tires on, and all of a sudden you're the cars that came in a little bit earlier than you have put on intermediates, and nobody's put on wets yet, but they're going there. Everybody's going to try and pit, but not everybody can pit at the same time, and there's pitting strategy and everything else. So I think when we encounter those bumps in the road and objectives change, it's the cohesion of the team that's able to come back and say, we're here, how do we turn around and go here, with the mutual respect and understanding that we're all trying to achieve the same objective. And at the same time, we know that there's going to be complexities, there's going to be challenges, there's going to be maybe budget challenges, there's going to be timeline and deliverable challenges, and how do we overcome those in the context of the fact that it's all of a sudden started pouring and no one's got wet tires on. Sliding all over the place. So, and very frequently development does feel like that. Sometimes those projects do feel like we're sliding all over the place. What happened? So.
Well, yeah, and again, having the team that can respond to that and keep moving forward and find the next strategy point, that seems to be a key takeaway from this conversation. Is that's what you want to end up with, and that's what you want to build over time is that kind of team approach that you can count on to move you forward. And Drupal is the kind of tool that a team can really take full advantage of.
Yes.
Whereas some of the other tools out there, the WordPress, the Joomla, having all those people is kind of overkill. Like, what are you going to do with it? You just can't go there in the same way.
Well, and you're right, and I think there's the idea that if you're just bolting a bunch of things on, those things may serve you well initially, and they may serve a client well who's maybe a little bit more DIY and who wants to have their hand in the game. But long term, they're not going to serve you as well as if you had sat down in the beginning and said, here's going to be our strategy and here's where we're going, and we're going to build the best tool for that, rather than making compromises along the way. And I was a Joomla lover. I mean, I was. And I'm a Drupal convert now. So, and it's not to say that, I still spend time in Joomla every day. At the same time, I also spend time in Drupal every day, and I'm able to see the differences between those. And sometimes it takes a little bit of a mental shift to be able to get your head around the fact that you're doing things differently, but then you see the power in being able to do that. So that's what we've been able to find with Drupal.
Well, and I have to admit to you guys, I think, Ann, you had mentioned something about the first time you looked at Drupal, and I actually had a similar experience. This is probably 2005 or 2006.
Same
I remember I installed Mambo, which of course was a precursor to Joomla. I installed WordPress, I installed Drupal, and I looked at Drupal, and I had no clue what to do. Like, I went to the front page, and I didn't know how to use it. I literally left it, and I became a WordPress developer for about 2 years, and built up a number of WordPress sites until I hit a limit. I had a site with 50,000 pages, and it was reaching out to these 300 other data resources and pulling data in. And it was like pulling the HostGator server down to its knees, and they shut down my website. And I kind of reached the limits with WordPress, and that's when I took another look at Drupal. And I have a background in computer engineering, so understanding how microprocessors are designed, understanding software stacks are things I knew, but I hadn't really given the time to Drupal to really understand how it was designed to work. And so once I did invest that time, I saw, wow, this is a far superior tool. And I ended up, basically staking my livelihood on it. And that was scary at first, but I soon afterward, I had no fear.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad that you took that path and built the company that you did, and the expertise in Drupal. I do thank both of you for your time today, Ann and Alex, for presenting this conversation and sharing that entire analogy. I think we unfurled it quite a bit there. And I think it's really helpful for people who are outside of the development community to find some way to kind of understand their choices. And so I think we accomplished that today. Thank you so much, audience, for joining us on this tour. And we look forward to finding your next winning race and teaming up on it.
Sounds good.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Very good. Till next time.